Welcome to Alien Shadow. If you love epic sci-fi stories where humanity shines, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for thrilling HFY adventures. Join us and be part of the journey. The last lullaby, the wind howled across the frozen plains. Louder than any scream Rinna could make, snow hit her face like small needles, sharp and biting. She held her baby close to her chest. Wrapping the last piece of cloth around the tiny body, the baby did not cry anymore, only shivered silently. Her skin was turning pale, and her breaths were too slow. Rinna knew what that meant. The baby was dying. She sat beside a broken wall made of ice and stone. It had once been part of a home. Now it was only a windbreaker. Her back leaned against the frozen stones as she looked at the sky. There were no stars tonight, just thick clouds and endless cold. Her fingers were blue, her lips dry and cracked. She couldn't cry anymore. Her tears had frozen long ago. All she had left was her voice, so she sang. Her voice was weak, almost lost in the storm, but she sang anyway. A lullaby from her world, from her people who were now gone. The song spoke of warmth, of fire, of safety. She rocked the baby gently. As she sang, each word came slower, softer, colder. She was ready to die. Not because she gave up, but because there was nothing left. No help, no rescue, no hope. Just ice, wind, and one final lullaby. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The snow piled on her shoulders. The baby stopped moving, and then she heard its footsteps. They were heavy, slow, coming closer. At first, she thought it was a dream. Maybe her mind had already started to drift into death, but the steps came again, clearer this time. Crunching snow, breaking ice, real and steady. Her heart beat once, weak but loud. She opened her eyes and blinked. A tall shape was moving through. The storm, humanoid, wrapped in thick gear, glowing faintly with heat, it walked directly toward her. Not turning away, she could not run, could not stand. She pulled the baby tighter to her chest, shielding her with her body if it was danger. She would protect her child even now. The figure stopped in front of her. A hand reached out. Slow and careful, Rinna stared up, seeing a human face behind a frost-covered visor. He knelt in the snow, placing a small heat cube beside the baby. Warm air spread immediately, pushing back the cold. The baby's skin twitched, just a little. The human didn't speak, but his eyes were gentle. Rinna tried to speak, but coughed instead. Her throat was dry, her body too weak. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his coat. She whispered one word, help. Then she passed out. The snow continued falling. But the human moved fast. He picked up both mother and child. His arms were strong, and his steps. Careful, he turned back through the storm, walking the same path he came from. His boots left deep prints in the snow, soon covered by wind. His breath came out in clouds as he spoke softly into a device. "To found," he said. "Both alive." The voice in his earpiece answered with static. Rinna's head rested against his chest, her body limp but still breathing. The baby's tiny fingers moved slightly, warmed by the device and the human's body heat. He reached a small hill, and below it, a hidden door opened in the ice. Lights blinked and machines hummed. The door closed behind them, sealing out the storm. Inside, it was warm, quiet, safe. He placed them on a medical bed and removed their frozen clothes. Warm blankets wrapped them both. A machine scanned their bodies and beeped softly. Vitals. Low, it said. But stable. The human sighed in relief and sat down beside them. He looked at the baby, then at the alien mother. He didn't know who they were or where they came from. But he knew one thing: he wouldn't let them die outside. The snowstorm raged on, but inside, a fire burned. A human had answered the lullaby. And now the song would continue, not as a goodbye, but as the beginning of something new. The baby let out a soft cry, and Rinna's fingers curled gently around the human's hand. The stranger in the storm had not stopped, but inside the shelter, the air was warm and dry. Rinna opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the strange ceiling above her. She sat up fast, heart racing, then cried out in fear. Her baby, where was her baby? She looked around, her body weak and shaking. But before panic could take her, she heard a soft sound. The baby was nearby, wrapped in clean blankets, sleeping peacefully under a glowing lamp. She crawled over and touched her child's face. Warm, soft, alive, tears filled her eyes. But this time they did not freeze. She didn't understand what had happened, only that someone had saved them. Then she heard footsteps against low, steady, human. The door opened and he stepped in. He wore a thick coat lined with fur, snow still melting off the shoulders. His face was young, maybe 30, and his eyes calm like deep water. He held a small cup and walked toward her without speaking. She backed away a little, still unsure if he was truly safe. He stopped a few feet from her and knelt down. Slowly, he placed the cup near her hands, then raised both his palms to show he meant no harm. Steam rose from the drink. The smell was strange, but not unpleasant. Rinna stared at the cup, then at the man. He didn't push her, didn't speak, just waited. Patient and silent, her fingers reached out and took the cup, her body needing it more than her pride could deny. She sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through her chest like fire. The man smiled slightly, then pointed to himself and said one word, "Elias." She watched him, not understanding at first, then pointed to herself and said, "Rinna." Their names crossed the space between them like a fragile bridge. He nodded, then walked to the corner and placed a small heater near the baby. Rinna studied him carefully, his tools, his clean room, the strange machines that moved with light and sound. He was not just a traveler, he was something more. He opened a screen on the wall and spoke into it. The machine translated his voice into symbols she did not know, but she saw her image on the screen and her baby's as well. She jumped up, frightened. Was he reporting her, turning her in? She grabbed the baby and stepped back, eyes full of fire. Elias turned quickly. Holding his hands up again, he said nothing, just slowly closed the screen. Then he knelt and opened a small box filled with food, soft bread, protein bars, a bottle of warm liquid. He pushed it toward her and stepped back. She stared at the food, confused. No one had ever treated her like this, not since the war began. She sat down slowly, feeding her baby first, then eating herself. Every bite tasted strange but rich. Elias sat across from her and watched quietly. There was no anger in him, no fear either. Only something she hadn't seen in a long time, kindness. Hours passed. In silence, broken only by the soft hum of machines, Rinna wrapped her baby tighter and laid her down to sleep. Then she turned to Elias. Slowly drawing lines in the dust with her finger, she drew a symbol of her planetary star and 2 moons. Then a wave, showing fire falling from the sky. Then silence, a broken circle, a lost people. Elias watched closely. Nodding as he understood her meaning, he tapped the screen again and searched for maps. He found a ruined sector marked in red. Long abandoned, he pointed to it, and she nodded. With tears in her eyes, that was her home, now burned. Forgotten by the stars, she drew one more thing, a small glowing child in her arms. Elias frowned, confused. She looked into his eyes and whispered one word. Hunted. He sat still, thinking something was wrong, something more than war. This child was not just a baby. She was important, maybe dangerous, maybe divine. He leaned back, his hand resting on a metal case near the wall. Inside it were weapons he thought he'd never use again. But now, he wasn't so sure outside. The storm was dying, the wind softer, the snow thinner, but inside the shelter, something had changed. A bond had formed, quiet and uncertain. Rinna no longer saw a stranger, she saw a protector. And Elias no longer saw just aliens in danger. He saw something he could not walk away from. He stood and walked to the door, looking out at the cold world beyond. Rinna held her baby close, her eyes never leaving him. He turned back to her and spoke one word, safe. And in that moment, for the first time in days, she believed it. The fire and the past asterisk the next morning came slow and silent. There was no sunrise on this frozen moon. Only a faint silver light that crept through the ice above. Inside the shelter, the heat never stopped, humming softly like a heart still beating. Rinna sat beside a small fire Elias had made in a steel container. Watching the flames flicker, her baby slept close to her chest. Finally warm, finally safe, Elias sat across from her, sipping from a metal cup, eyes thoughtful, quiet. The crackle of the fire was the only sound between them. She pointed at the flame and spoke softly in her language. Elias didn't understand the words, but he could feel their meaning. She told a story, one not written in books, but burned into her memory. She picked up a stick and drew into the ash beside the fire. A tall tower, a planet, and then fire falling. From above, her fingers moved slowly, trembling with memory. Elias leaned closer. Watching her every motion, she pointed to the tower again, then placed her hand over her chest. Elias understood this was her home, her people, her past. She looked up at the ceiling, blinking away a memory too heavy to hold. Then she pressed her forehead to the baby's and whispered something. Elias said nothing, just listened, just watched. He remembered war too, but nothing like this. He stood and walked to a panel on the wall. With a few taps, he brought up a display of planets. He pointed to one of them, a red-marked zone with a name she didn't recognize. But when the image zoomed in, Rinna gasped. It was her world cracked, scorched, dead. She pressed her hand to the screen and looked away. Elias lowered his eyes and shut the display. He walked to a metal trunk near the far corner of the shelter. Inside were things from his past armor, old mission data, memory cards filled with records. He pulled out a scanning tool and returned to her. Gently, he waved it over the baby's body, curious about something he didn't yet understand. The screen flashed and beeped with soft pulses, showing strange symbols, energy levels, DNA maps, signatures he'd never seen in any known species. The baby was not just rare, she was something else entirely. He looked at Rinna and slowly turned the screen toward her. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in fear. She stood up fast, clutching the baby and backing away. Her voice shook as she shouted something in her language. Elias stepped back, raising his hands in peace. She didn't trust the machine, didn't trust what he'd found. To her, every scan was a trap, every analysis a curse. But Elias didn't move closer. He shut the scanner off and placed it gently on the table. Then he knelt again, placing one hand on his chest. Rinna's breathing slowed, her eyes still hard, but less afraid. The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a soft coo. That sound brought her back to calm. She looked at Elias with cautious eyes and sat down again. They stayed like that for a long time. He gave her food again, this time letting her eat first before checking the baby. He didn't scan anymore, didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside the fire, sharing the warmth, slowly. She pointed to the baby and then to her own heart. Then she pointed up, past the ceiling, past the stars. Elias understood others would come. He nodded and opened a new file on his tablet. He searched the galactic network for any bounty or signal. And there it was, a hidden broadcast marked classified, target, female refugee, species unknown. Child of high genetic value, capture alive, priority 1. He read it twice, feeling cold despite the fire. This baby wasn't just special, she was wanted. He turned off the screen and looked at them both. Rinna was humming again, that same soft lullaby from the night before. But now it sounded different, not a song of goodbye. It was a song of protection, a mother's vow to stand between her child and the galaxy. Elias had seen many things in his life: war, loss, betrayal, but never had he seen something so quiet and strong, so full of fire without flame. He stood up and walked to the back of the shelter. There, behind a sealed door, waited weapons from another life. He hadn't touched them in years, but now, one by one, he began to clean them. Rinna watched with silent eyes. She didn't stop him, because deep inside she knew someone was coming. And when they came, the human would be ready. Not just to fight, but to protect what had become his reason to stay alive outside. The sky remained gray and silent. But in the heart of that cold world, something warm had begun to burn. A mother, a child, and a stranger from another species, 3 lives woven together by fate and fire. And the past was only the beginning. What the baby means, the baby began to glow. Not brightly, but enough to light the room with a soft blue shimmer. Elias stared in disbelief, his hands frozen halfway through cleaning his old weapon. Rinna didn't look surprised, only tired, only afraid. She pulled her baby closer and turned away, as if hiding. The light could erase the danger. But Elias stepped forward slowly. Kneeling beside her, he reached out. Not to take the baby, but to understand. The light danced across his fingers like mist. He looked at Rinna, eyes full of silent questions. She shook her head, then pointed to her baby's heart. Then she held up one finger, then tapped her head. Elias tried to follow, tried to make sense. This baby wasn't like others, wasn't even like Rinna. She was something new, something rare, and someone out there would kill to take her. Elias tapped his wrist device and opened a medical analysis page. He searched for genetic data, species types, anything that could match. Nothing came up, not one record, not one match. The baby's DNA was a puzzle, each strand glowing faintly with markers he'd never seen, a blend of ancient code and something completely unknown. It was like she wasn't born, but chosen. Rinna stood up and walked to the far wall. She wiped the metal surface clean and drew again with her finger. This time, a circle within a circle, glowing lines spreading outward like energy. She turned and placed her hand on the baby's head. Elias understood. At last, the child was not just special, not just rare. She was a symbol, maybe even a key. A symbol of hope, or power, or both. He backed away slowly and sat down, his mind spinning, trying to grasp what this truly meant. If the child was hunted, it wasn't for crime. It was for what she could become. Maybe a leader, maybe a weapon, or maybe something greater, something that would change everything. That's why the bounty was marked alive only. Rinna walked to him, carrying the child. She placed the baby in his arms without a word. Elias froze, unsure. The baby opened her glowing eyes and stared up at him. She didn't cry, didn't squirm, just watched. He felt the heat through her skin. Like holding a tiny sun wrapped in life, he held her gently, like the universe had just been handed to him. Rinna sat beside him, her voice soft. She began to hum again, but this time, not a lullaby. This was a song of her people, a history passed through sound. Elias didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear: pride, sorrow, memory. He listened without speaking, afraid to break the moment. This was her story, and now he was part of it. Not just a stranger, not just a rescuer, but something closer. The scanner on the table blinked with a sudden alert. A signal nearby. Elias stood up fast. Placing the baby back in Rinna's arms, he checked the data and frowned. A ship had entered the system, masked but traceable. They were scanning for life signs, targeting non-human signals. And they were getting closer by the minute he moved, quickly shutting off all outside beacons, masking the heat signature. The baby's glow dimmed as Rinna covered her with reflective cloth. Elias opened a secret panel on the floor and powered up a shielding unit. Old war, tech illegal, dangerous, but strong. The hum of the shelter turned silent to the sky above. The shelter now looked empty. Dead, forgotten, invisible. Rinna looked at Elias with wide eyes. He nodded to her. Then opened another panel filled with weapons, plasma rifles, gravity grenades, cloaking tools. All polished and ready, he handed her a small pulse blade, and though her hand shook, she took it. He wasn't just protecting them anymore, he was preparing them. Because if someone came through that storm, they would not be welcome. The baby stirred again and gave a faint cry. Rinna whispered something calming. Elias turned down the lights and loaded the final clip into his rifle. Then he looked at them both, the mother, the child. The meaning behind their pain. He had once believed the war was over, but now he knew something far greater was beginning. And in this storm, on this frozen moon, the galaxy would not see a soldier or a survivor. They would see a protector. A man standing between a child and the dark. And that meant one thing. Whoever was coming, they would have to go through him first. The hunter approaches *, the wind had returned. But this time, it wasn't just nature. The scanner picked up faint pulses, engine burns, low-altitude sweeps, someone searching. Elias stood near the entrance hatch, watching the silent monitor. A small red dot blinked slowly, then 2, then 3. They were not merchants, not explorers. They were coming for something specific. And he knew exactly what it was. Inside the shelter, Rinna sat with her baby held close. She rocked her gently, whispering soft words in her alien tongue. The baby's glow had faded under the shield cloth, but she was still warm, still alive. Rinna had stopped asking questions. She trusted Elias now, not with her story, but with her survival, and Elias had already made a choice. He wouldn't let them take the child. He moved through the back of the shelter, unlocking crates sealed since the last war. Inside were coils of wire, heat mines, and motion-detecting spikes. He planted them across the icy plain, hidden under the snow, each one armed with a soft beep. Ready to trigger when touched, he placed sensor drones in the sky, cloaked, floating silently like cold ghosts. The map updated in real time. He was building a trap. Not just for defense, but for a message. Rinna watched him from the doorway, the cold wind tugging at her scarf. She held the baby tight and stepped outside for the first time since her rescue. The snow crunched beneath her bare feet. She walked slowly toward him and placed her hand on his shoulder. He turned, and for a second, they said nothing. Then she nodded once, not out of fear but strength. She would fight too, if needed. The scanner beeped again, louder this time. One of the drones sent a blur of movement, dark metal, clawed legs, multiple arms, not human, not robotic. Something in between. Bounty units, grown in labs and guided by old war AI. No emotions, no mercy. Only one goal: retrieve the child. They moved fast through the storm. Not slowed by wind or snow. They were trained for death and nothing else. Elias returned to the shelter and handed Rinna a small device. It was a cloak band, light reactive, able to hide her and the baby for 30 minutes. Enough time to run, enough time to survive. He knelt down beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You run if I fall," he said slowly. She didn't understand every word, but the meaning was clear. Her eyes narrowed and she nodded again. He placed the baby in a padded pod near the rear of the shelter, hidden under metal and snowproof lining. Then he turned off all lights and powered down all heat. Only his own suit kept him alive now. He waited, rifle ready. The storm outside covered all noise except for the soft hum of machines approaching, and then it began. The first explosion ripped through the outer snowbank, one mine gone, then another, heat signatures bursting bright. On the screen, a screech followed metal against ice. Something sliding, something wrong. Elias fired through the wall slit. His plasma shot glowing blue in the night. A direct hit. One hunter dropped, sparks flying, limbs twitching. But the others came faster. Adapting, crawling low, they were. Learning, even without minds. Inside, Rinna stood silently near the child. She held the blade Elias had given her. Glowing faintly in her grip, every step outside shook the walls. Every sound made her heart race, but she did not run. Not yet. She waited. Just like Elias told her, the baby didn't cry. She just watched, wide-eyed, like she understood something. Something deeper than survival. Elias rolled from cover and fired again. Dropping a second unit, he moved with speed and skill. Every step planned, every shot perfect. But there were more now. 4, maybe 5, shadows in the storm. One jumped at him, and he ducked, firing into its core from below. It exploded in a shower of glowing liquid, but the last one reached the door, claws slashing through steel. Elias shouted inside and ran after it. The wall burst open with a crash. Metal bent and groaning. Rinna stood in front of the pod, blade ready, arms shaking. The hunter entered. Scanning the room with cold red eyes, it lunged toward her, but before it struck, Elias tackled it from behind. The two crashed into the floor. Weapons flying, limbs locked in combat. The hunter screeched and stabbed. Metal piercing Elias's side. He gasped, but didn't stop. Rinna screamed and slashed downward. Cutting deep into the hunter's neck, it sparked, jerked, then collapsed. With a heavy thud, Elias coughed, blood running down his side. He leaned back against the wall, smiling weakly. "Good timing," he whispered. Rinna dropped beside him. Us. Wrapping cloth around the wound, the baby cried out once, then fell quiet again. Outside, the storm began to calm, but inside, the shelter was full of heat and blood and breath. They had survived not because they were strong, but because they fought together. Elias looked at Rinna and the child. He wasn't just protecting a mission anymore. He was defending a future. Blood in the snow blew into the shelter through the broken door. The wind screamed across the floor, carrying bits of ice and ash. Elias sat slumped against the wall, his shirt soaked in blood. He pressed a cloth against his side, breathing. Hard eyes locked on the entrance. Rinna knelt beside him, her hands red, her fingers trembling. The baby stayed wrapped in thick cloth, hidden behind crates. They had won for now, but the fight wasn't over. Outside, the hunter bodies steamed in the cold. One still twitched, its systems trying to reboot. Elias raised his rifle and fired a final shot through its core. The spark faded, the machine stilled. He lowered the weapon slowly, hand shaking. He turned toward Rinna, trying to smile. Still breathing, he muttered. Voice raw and tired. Rinna held his hand and nodded. She didn't need to understand every word. She only saw the pain on his face. The way he stayed awake to keep her safe. She reached into a supply box and pulled out a medkit. Her hands worked. Fast, cleaning the wound, sealing it with soft foam. Elias winced but didn't push her away. He watched her in silence as she saved him. Then the baby cried again, not out of fear, but something else. A low glow returned to her skin, blue and pulsing with slow waves. Rinna rushed to her, checking for wounds. None. But the glow kept growing. Brighter, warmer. Elias frowned, trying to sit up. The energy signature was too strong, too sudden. Something was happening, something they didn't understand. The scanner on the wall turned itself on, detecting the energy field. It displayed swirling patterns. Not from any known tech, the baby's light wasn't just warmth or biology. Was broadcasting, sending signals through the ice, through the snow, through the stars. Rinna stepped back, scared, unsure if she should stop it, but Elias placed a hand on her arm and shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Let her outside." The air changed. The wind stilled and a strange warmth flowed over the land. The snow stopped falling for the first time in weeks. Elias stared at the screen. New signals appeared, unknown patterns, not hostile. It was like someone or something had heard her. Not a weapon, not a beacon, but a voice. The child was calling out. And someone far away was listening. Rinna dropped to her knees beside her daughter, whispering her name. The baby's eyes glowed now, bright and steady, like twin suns. And then, the storm above cracked open with a strange light. Not lightning, not fire, something different. A gentle column of soft energy fell from the sky into the distant mountains. Elias stared at it, blinking in disbelief. The child had awakened something ancient, but before they could think further, another signal flashed across the screen. A new ship entering orbit, fast, large, armed, not bounty hunters this time. Something far worse, a black mark on the scanner. Shielded, burning through the clouds, Elias pushed himself to his feet with a grunt. Pain shooting up his spine, Rinna caught him, trying to stop him from standing, but he shook his head, eyes full of fire again. "They're coming," he whispered. He walked to the storage room and opened the last container, his old armor. Battle-worn, heavy, but still functional, he suited up, piece by piece, pain in every motion, but purpose in every breath. Rinna armed herself again, this time with a calm focus. She didn't wait to be told. She already knew. The last fight was coming, and it would be the hardest. The baby lay still in her pod, glowing like a crystal. Her presence no longer just a mystery, but a message. Elias stared out the broken doorway, the light fading from the mountains. He whispered under his breath, "They won't touch her." His rifle clicked into place, visor sealing shut. Behind him, Rinna stood with blade in hand. They were not soldiers, not heroes, but they were ready to bleed. And when the black ship landed, melting snow beneath its hull, the child's glow pulsed once more. Not in fear, not in panic, but in strength. And the fire inside the shelter burned brighter than the blood on the floor, because now, Elias and Rinna didn't just carry a child, they carried the future, and they would protect it until their last breath. A new dawn. The black ship hovered above the frozen plain. Its engines rumbled low, shaking the ground and blowing snow in wide circles. Elias stood at the shattered doorway of the shelter, armored and armed. Rinna stood beside him, her blade gripped tight, her breath calm but fast. The baby slept behind them in the glowing pod, still shining with soft blue light. They didn't speak, didn't run. They stood between the child and the storm, ready to face what came. The ship's hatch opened with a hiss. A figure stepped out tall, cloaked in armor that shimmered like glass and ash. Its face was hidden behind a mask, its movements smooth and quiet. Behind it came more, 3, maybe 4, each one armed with weapons that pulsed red. They walked forward slowly, not rushing. They knew what they were after. They believed no one could stop them. Elias raised his weapon and took one step forward. He said nothing, just stared down the leader through his visor. The wind cut between them, but neither side moved. Then the leader raised a hand, not to attack, but to speak. A mechanical voice echoed through the air. "Give us the child." Elias answered without pause. No. There was no fear in his voice. Only fire. The enemy moved fast, weapons raised, firing first. The shelter lit up with heat and sound. explosions rocking the walls. Elias returned fire, each shot perfect, each step solid. Rinna moved like shadow, blade flashing, cutting through. Armor with fierce strikes. The enemy was strong, but they were not ready for this. Not ready for a human and an alien mother fighting as one. Not ready for the will to protect. Not ready for love turned to fury. One attacker reached the pod but stopped suddenly. The child's glow had changed from soft blue to brilliant white. The light burst outward in a ring, throwing the attacker back like a broken doll. Everyone froze, even Rinna and Elias. The child floated just slightly above the pod. Her eyes open, her skin glowing like starlight. She wasn't afraid. She was awake. Elias turned his head slowly, speechless. The energy around the child pulsed like a living field, wrapping the room in warmth and silence. Even the enemies stepped back, weapons shaking in their hands. The leader tried to speak again, but the child raised her hand. And the ship behind them cracked in the sky, metal groaning as systems shut down. Not from damage, but from her. From the child they had called a target. The attackers dropped there. Weapons and ran. The ground shook as the black ship powered down completely. Rinna dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Not out of sadness, but out of awe. Elias walked toward the child. He now rested gently in the air. He held out his arms. And she floated down into them, silent, peaceful. She looked at him with eyes far too old for her size. Outside, the sky began to change. The thick clouds rolled back slowly, letting golden light spill through. It was the first sunrise seen on that moon in many years. The storm was gone, and the world felt new. Rinna stepped out of the shelter, her hand shielding her eyes from the light. Elias followed, holding the child close. The snow beneath their feet sparkled like crystal. No more ships came, no more hunters. Whatever signal the child had sent was now complete. Something out there knew she was alive and that she was not alone. Elias built a new shelter with help from old machines. He gave Rinna her own room, built a cradle for the baby, and planted heat towers in the ice. The place once meant for hiding became a home, and the frozen wasteland slowly turned into life. Each day, the baby grew stronger. Her powers quiet, but always present. She no longer glowed at night, she dreamed. She laughed, played, learned to walk, and when she looked at Elias or Rinna, it was with the eyes of someone who remembered everything. Rinna began to sing again. Not songs of sorrow, but songs of beginnings. The lullabies were no longer a goodbye. They were a promise. Elias would sometimes sit outside and stare at the ton color. It was some casing outside and stare at the sky. He had fought in wars, seen planets die, watched stars fall, but nothing had ever felt like this. Not battle, not command, not orders, only this. A child, a mother, and a man once lost in the cold, now held together by warmth stronger than fire, by a bond no galaxy could break, and far above. In the stars they once feared, others listened. Others watched, others waited, not to destroy, but to learn. Because one day this child would rise, and the universe would remember where she came from a song in the snow, from footsteps in the storm, from love, from pain, and from a human who said no.